Ruth Halverson had been doing farm debt mediation in southwest Minnesota for 14 years, and she had never placed a call quite like the one she made at 8:17 in the morning on March 8, 2011. The man she reached at First Western Agricultural Bank's regional office in Minneapolis asked her to repeat the part about the addendum. She repeated it. She heard him set the phone down on his desk without saying anything. She waited in the kitchen of a farm in Redwood County, Minnesota, while a woman named Vera Lund stood in the doorway of the small office across the hall and held a single page of paper in both hands and did not say a word. Carl Lund had been gone 11 months by then. But he was the reason that call was possible. He was the reason any of it was possible. This is the kind of story my father would tell. If yours told stories like it, this channel is for you. Subscribe before we go any further, and we'll keep telling them. The farm was 320 acres in Redwood County, Minnesota, 4 miles north of the town of Clements on the east side of the county road. On the morning of March 8, 2011, the ground was still frozen. The corn stubble from the previous fall stood in pale rows across the north fields, and the feedlot on the west side of the farmstead, empty since Carl sold the last of the feeder cattle in November, was glazed with old ice. The temperature at 6 in the morning was 11 degrees. The sky was a flat, uniform gray that gives no information about what kind of day is ahead. Carl's father had bought the first 160 acres in 1951 at $48 an acre, which was $7,680 and most of what he had saved in 11 years of farming other men's ground in Yellow Medicine County. Carl took the operation over in 1973, the year his father's knees gave out, and the year Carl was 22 and not entirely sure he was ready, though that uncertainty did not stay long. He added the South 160 in 1983 when the neighboring family retired and the ground came available. It was good ground, flat and well drained in dry years, slow to shed water in wet ones. Carl farmed it in corn and soybeans on a 2-year rotation behind a John Deere 7800 he bought used in 1997 and kept in running order for 14 years. He kept his inputs modest and produced the kind of steady yields that county extension agents describe as reliable rather than exceptional, which is a distinction that tends to matter more over 30 years than over 1. He had not had a serious year until 2008. 2 bad crop years back to back. Then the 2008 credit contraction hit the input suppliers, and the operating line at First Western tightened at exactly the wrong time. He had carried more debt than usual going into 2009 and less margin to service it. By the time he died in March of 2010, the outstanding balance on the First Western operating note was $387,000, and the farm had not produced a profitable year in 2. Vera Lund was 58 years old when Carl died. She had been beside him on that ground since she was 27. She knew how to farm it. What she did not know, and could not have known then, was what the next 12 months were going to ask of her. She requested a loan modification from First Western in June of 2010. The modification committee reviewed the file and declined in September. In January of 2011, First Western filed to foreclose. The sheriff's foreclosure sale was scheduled for March 8, 2011, at 9:00 in the morning at the Redwood County Courthouse in Redwood Falls. A deputy from the Redwood County Sheriff's Department arrived at the Lund farm at 6:22 on the morning of the sale to serve the final personal notice required under Minnesota Agricultural Foreclosure Statute, a formal acknowledgement that the borrower had been informed of the sale proceeding and its terms. His name was Phil Moreau. He had been with the department for 15 years. He had served agricultural foreclosure notices before, and he knew what doors felt like from the outside when the people behind them had been awake since before 5. Vera answered in her work jacket. She had already done the barn check. She looked at the deputy, looked at the document, and took it. She read it at the kitchen table. Arlen Gustafsson sat across from her, with his coat still on. Arlen was 71 years old. He had worked for Carl Lund since 1989, hired hand at first, then full-time, then something that resisted job titles because it had gone on too long and covered too much ground to be named simply. He was at the farm that morning because he was at the farm most mornings by 5:30. He had made coffee. He had set a cup in front of Vera and one in front of himself, and had not said very much. That was the right thing to do, and he knew it. The notice said the sale would proceed at 9 a.m. at the courthouse. If the outstanding balance, $387,000 plus accrued interest and legal fees, was not cured before that time, the property would be sold at public auction with First Western Agricultural Bank as the presumptive buyer. Vera read it twice. She set it on the table. She thought, for a moment, that Carl would have been the one to know what to do next. Then she stopped thinking that and did the thing herself. She called Ruth Halverson. Ruth's number was on the refrigerator, written on a card a neighbor named Delbert Sharp had given Vera in September when the loan modification came back denied. Delbert had gone through a debt mediation himself in 2007 and said Ruth had done him some good. Vera had put the card on the refrigerator under a magnet from the county fair and had not looked at it since. It was 6:48 when she called. Ruth picked up on the second ring, which surprised Vera. She said later she hadn't known what she expected. She had half expected a recording. Ruth asked what had happened. Vera told her. Ruth said she was driving out 40 minutes and that before she arrived, Vera should open Carl's desk and not move anything. Carl's desk was a roll top in the small office off the kitchen, an oak piece that had been his father's and that had no practical reason to be in a working farm office, except that Carl was not a man who discarded things that still functioned. The desk had 12 drawers of varied sizes. Carl had used all of them. He had a system. Everything in its drawer. Everything labeled in blue ink on a strip of masking tape on the drawer front. The fourth drawer on the right side of the desk said, Loan Docs, FWAB, Current. Ruth arrived at 7:41. She shook Vera's hand, sat down at the desk, and put on reading glasses. She opened the fourth drawer. The drawer had the loan agreement from 1998, the refinancing Carl had done to consolidate and restructure the original 1991 operating note. It was 41 pages, tabbed with small strips of torn notebook paper that Carl had placed at sections he thought important. Behind the main agreement, clipped with a binder clip to the back cover, was a 2-page addendum. It was typed in Courier font on paper that had yellowed at the edges. The heading read, Attachment A, USTA Guarantee Provisions, incorporated by reference. Carl Lund had not attended college. He graduated from Redwood Falls High School in 1969 and went directly to the farm. What he had developed in the following 40 years was a conviction, tested repeatedly, that the people you borrowed money from did not always read their own paperwork as carefully as you should read it. He read every loan document he ever signed. He read them in the kitchen with a pencil and a cup of coffee. He underlined the things that seemed consequential. He put a question mark in the margin next to anything he didn't understand well enough to sign without asking first. And then he asked. Not aggressively, not suspiciously, just methodically, the way a man works a field he intends to return to for 30 years. In 1998, the loan officer handling the refinancing was a young man named Gary Brecky, who had been with First Western for 3 years and who answered Carl's questions without condescension, which was not always how those meetings went. Carl asked about foreclosure rights, specifically what a borrower could do if the bank moved against the property. Brecky explained the standard Minnesota 12-month statutory redemption period. Carl asked whether there was anything else. Brecky looked through the file and mentioned that the 1991 operating note had been originated under a USTA Farm Service Agency guarantee program, and that under the guarantee terms, which survived refinancing if the guarantee itself remained in place, there was a provision giving the borrower or surviving spouse the right to repurchase the property at the foreclosure sale price within 6 hours of the sale's completion, provided they could produce evidence of sufficient financing. Carl asked him to put that in the addendum. Breck typed it up. It was Attachment A. Carl filed it in the fourth drawer, behind the main agreement, clipped to the back cover. In 2011, when First Western's legal team prepared the foreclosure action, they pulled the 1998 refinancing document as the operative agreement and reviewed it without turning to the attached pages. The guarantee addendum from 1991 was on the second page of Attachment A. Section 7C was the relevant paragraph. It was 71 words long. Not obscure, not buried, just unread. Ruth read Section 7C at 7:58 in the morning. She read it again. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. She looked at the clock on the wall. She put her glasses back on and read it a third time. Then she looked up at Vera. The foreclosure sale was at 9 a.m. The 6-hour window would open when the sale was completed and would close at 3 p.m. They had 4 hours and 2 minutes before the window opened, and then 6 hours after that. They were not going to stop the foreclosure. Carl hadn't built a mechanism for stopping it. He had built something else, a door in the wall on the other side of the foreclosure, a right to walk back through within 6 hours if Vera could find the financing. The bank could foreclose. They had the legal right. They had followed the statute, and then she could buy it back at the price they paid, on the same morning, before the sun had moved much past where it was when the deputy knocked. What she needed was $412,000 plus fees in the form of a commitment letter. Not cash in hand, a commitment letter delivered before 3:04 p.m. That was the window. 6 hours from the gavel. Ruth called First Western's regional office in Minneapolis at 8:17. She was transferred twice before reaching a senior loan officer named David Wiesner. She told him what she was holding. He asked her to repeat the section number. She repeated it. He asked her to fax it. She sent it from Carl's old brother machine in the corner of the office, the machine Carl had bought in 2001, and which still worked because he maintained it, while Wiesner was still on the line. He said he would call her back. Ruth set the phone down on Carl's kitchen table. She looked at the clock on the wall, the same clock, a round schoolhouse model with a cracked bezel that had been in that kitchen for as long as anyone could say. It was 8:24. Vera was in the doorway of the office, still holding the addendum. Arlen Gustafson was in his chair with his hands on the table and his coffee untouched. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then, Ruth picked the phone back up. Ruth called Farm Credit Services of North Central Farm Credit in St. Cloud while she waited for Wiesner to call back. She had worked with them on 2 emergency loan situations in the previous 5 years. The loan officer who took the call was a woman named Carol Baquet, who had been with Farm Credit for 11 years, and who asked 3 questions before Ruth had finished her second sentence. What is the property? What is the appraised value? What is the amount? Ruth told her. The Redwood County assessment on the Lund ground ran $4,850 per acre that year. At 320 acres, that was $1,552,000 in assessed value against a $412,000 purchase price. The farm carried equity that the foreclosure sale had effectively severed from the Lund family. Baki understood this without needing it explained. She said she would have a preliminary commitment letter ready within 2 hours and asked for the property legal description. Arlen Gustafsson found it in the top left drawer of Carl's desk. He did not know exactly which drawer to look in, but he went through them one at a time from the top left, which was the order Carl had always used when he was looking for something himself, and the description was in the third drawer under a tab that said County and Title. David Wiesner called back at 9:22. The sale had completed at 9:04 a.m. First Western was the buyer at $412,000. The 6-hour window had opened. He said, in the careful tone of a man who has just found something uncomfortable in his own client's documentation, that First Western was reviewing its position with outside counsel. Ruth told him the window closed at 3:04 p.m. He said he would call her back. He called at 10:11. His voice had the particular flatness of a man delivering information he had confirmed 3 times before picking up the phone. First Western acknowledged the addendum. They acknowledged Section 7C. Outside counsel had reviewed it. The purchase price to exercise the right of repurchase, he said, would be $412,000 plus the morning's accrued title and recording fees, which brought the total to $412,847. He asked if she wanted that confirmed in writing. She said yes. He said it would be faxed within the hour. Ruth wrote the number on the back of an envelope, underlined it once, and called Carol Baki. Baki adjusted the commitment letter amount to $415,000 to provide for costs and sent it by fax at 11:06 a.m. It was 3 pages. Ruth read all of it before she handed it to Vera. Then she handed it to Vera, who read it herself. Vera stood at Carl's desk to read it, one hand on the roll top for balance, the way she sometimes stood when she was reading something that mattered. Arlen Gustafsson drove her to Redwood Falls. He pulled into the parking lot of the First Western branch at 11:19. He told her he would wait in the truck. She asked if he wanted to come in. He said he was a better truck man than a bank man, which was true, and she went inside. The branch manager, a woman named Sandra Holst, who had been at that branch for 9 years, handled the transaction with correctness, which is to say she processed the paperwork exactly as it needed to be processed, and did not say anything that wasn't required. Not warm, not cold. Just professional, the way a person is when they understand that their role is to do the paperwork correctly and not to have an opinion about what the paperwork means. The purchase agreement was prepared. Vera sat at the desk across from her. She reviewed each page. She signed it at 11:33 in the morning. The pen was a plain black ballpoint from a cup on Sandra Holst's desk. Vera set it down when she was finished and looked at the document and did not say anything for a moment. Then, she said thank you and stood up. The title company in Redwood Falls completed the deed transfer at 1:47 p.m. The 6-hour window closed at 3:04 p.m. She had 1 hour and 17 minutes left when she walked back out to Arlen Gustafsson in the parking lot. He had been in the truck with the engine off, watching the door. He did not ask how it had gone. He could read what he needed from the way she walked through it. He put the key in. He started the engine. He pulled out of the lot without saying anything, which was the right thing, and the thing Carl would have done. Farm Credit Services funded the loan in full 17 days later, after the title review and appraisal confirmed the property value. The appraisal came in at $4,920 per acre, $1,574,400 for the 320 acres, which was $1,161,553 more than First Western had paid for it at the foreclosure sale that morning. The equity that had nearly been severed from the Lund family in a 6-hour window was returned to it in a different 6-hour window, on the same day, because a man had asked the right question in 1998 and kept the answer in the right drawer. Vera drove back to the farm that afternoon. She walked the fields before dark, the frozen north fields and the feedlot in the south ground where the drainage tile ran under the road. She said later she was not entirely sure why she walked them that day. She just felt like she ought to. Vera made every payment on the farm credit note on time. She paid it off in October of 2018, 7 years and 5 months before its scheduled maturity. In the years between, she restructured the operation, renting the row crop ground to a neighboring farmer while she rebuilt the home 40 acres into a small hay and Hereford cattle operation. Carl had talked about Herefords for years. He had always said that when the debt was clear and the land was paid for, he would run a small herd and do it right, registered stock, good records. The kind of operation that was quiet and careful, and nothing like the industrial feedlot the farm had briefly tried to become in the 1980s before he decided against it. She did it because the debt was clear, and the land was paid for, and because there was no remaining reason not to do the thing he had described wanting to do. She started with 14 head in 2014. She had 62 by 2019. Gary Brecky, the loan officer who had typed the addendum in 1998, retired from banking in 2007 and moved to Tucson. Vera found his address through a former colleague at the bank and sent him a letter in May of 2011. She told him what the document had done. She thanked him for typing it when Carl asked. He wrote back 3 weeks later. He said he had typed a lot of addendums in his years at the bank and did not remember that one specifically, but that he was glad Carl had asked the question. He said that in his experience, the people who asked the right question at the right time were the ones who generally ended up with something to show for it. He said he meant that as a compliment to Carl. Vera Lund is 71 years old now. She runs the Hereford operation and leases the row crop ground and has not missed a payment on anything in 11 years. 3 people have asked to buy the farm in that time. She told all 3 of them the same thing. Arlen Gustafson is 83. He does not farm anymore, but he drives out to the Lund place once or twice a month in the summer to look at the cattle and drink coffee in Carl's kitchen. He has said to the few people who have asked him about March 8, 2011, that he was not surprised by how the day ended. He had worked for Carl Lund for 22 years. He knew the kind of man who labeled his drawers. Carl's desk is still in the office off the kitchen. The roll top still works. The 4th drawer on the right still has the masking tape on the front. The blue ink slightly faded now. Carl's handwriting, loan docs, FWAB, current. The drawer sticks a little in cold weather. Vera leaves it as it is. She has never moved the addendum. She does not need to read it anymore. She has it memorized.